The grand fundraising event begins with an air of excitement and anticipation. The venue, an ancient temple dedicated to cosmic justice in California, is adorned with elegant decorations and filled with wealthy donors eager to contribute to what they believe is a noble cause. Charles, the charismatic CEO of the NGO, makes his entrance. He strides confidently onto the stage, his tailored suit and winning smile exuding an aura of success and trustworthiness. The crowd applauds enthusiastically as he takes his place at the podium, ready to deliver his speech. As Charles begins to speak, his words are filled with promises of hope and change. He assures the audience that every penny raised will go directly to those in need. His voice is strong and convincing, painting a picture of a world made better through their collective efforts. However, as Charles continues his speech, the scene cuts away to reveal a series of contrasting images. We see Charles at lavish parties, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by celebrities and socialites. The next shot shows him behind the wheel of a luxury sports car, speeding down a coastal highway without a care in the world. The montage continues, revealing Charles's life of excess. We see him lounging on a private yacht, sunbathing on exclusive beaches, and dining at five-star restaurants. Each image is a stark contrast to the humble, selfless persona he presents on stage. Throughout these revealing glimpses into Charles's true lifestyle, we hear his voice continuing in the background. He speaks of responsibility, sacrifice, and the importance of giving back to society. The irony is palpable as his words about helping the less fortunate are juxtaposed against his clearly lavish personal indulgences. The scene returns to the present, where Charles concludes his speech with a passionate plea for donations. The audience, unaware of his duplicity, responds with enthusiastic applause and open checkbooks, ready to support what they believe is a worthy cause. As the event progresses, the atmosphere remains charged with enthusiasm. Charles, having finished his rousing speech, steps back from the podium with a satisfied smile. The audience, still captivated by his words, begins to discuss potential donation amounts among themselves. Suddenly, a technical glitch disrupts the smooth flow of the evening. The large screen behind Charles, intended to display promotional videos of the NGO's work, flickers and goes blank for a moment. The crowd murmurs in confusion, but Charles attempts to maintain composure, assuring everyone that it's just a minor setback. However, when the screen comes back to life, it doesn't show the expected charity footage. Instead, it displays a series of private messages from Charles's personal device. The text is large and clear, easily readable by everyone in the room. These messages reveal Charles's true intentions, detailed plans for embezzling funds, manipulating financial reports, and living a life of luxury at the expense of the charity's beneficiaries. Oblivious to what's happening behind him, Charles continues to address the audience, unaware that he's now reading aloud his own incriminating messages. His words, once inspiring, now take on a sinister double meaning as they align with the exposed corruption on the screen. The crowd's reaction shifts from confusion to shock. Whispers ripple through the gathering as donors begin to realize the extent of Charles's deception. Some gasp audibly, while others shake their heads in disbelief. The atmosphere in the room becomes tense and uncomfortable. Among the audience, Sarah, a former employee of the NGO, sits rigid in her seat. She recognizes the messages immediately, having seen similar correspondence during her time at the organization. Memories of her unjust dismissal for attempting to expose the truth flood back, igniting a fire within her. As Charles continues his oblivious performance, more and more attendees turn their attention to the damning evidence displayed behind him. The disconnect between his words and the revealed truth becomes increasingly apparent, creating a surreal and unsettling scene. Sarah feels a surge of emotions, anger at the injustice, vindication that her suspicions were correct, and a growing urge to take action. She knows that this moment could be her chance to finally bring the truth to light and right the wrongs she witnessed. The tension in the room continues to build as Charles, still unaware of the unfolding drama, prepares to move on to the next part of the event. The stage is set for a confrontation that will change the course of the evening and potentially the lives of everyone involved. The tension in the room reaches a breaking point. Sarah, unable to contain herself any longer, abruptly stands up from her seat. Her sudden movement draws attention, and nearby attendees turn to look at her with curiosity. "Stop." Sarah's voice rings out, clear and commanding. The room falls silent as all eyes turn to her. Charles, caught off guard, pauses mid-sentence and looks towards the source of the interruption. Sarah steps into the aisle, her posture confident despite the nervousness she feels inside. "Stop lying, Charles," she continues, her voice growing stronger with each word. The audience, already unsettled by the messages on the screen, focuses intently on this unexpected development. Charles attempts to regain control of the situation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're in the middle of an important fundraiser. Perhaps we can address your concerns later." His voice wavers slightly, betraying his unease. Undeterred, Sarah presses on. She introduces herself as a former employee of the NGO and begins to share her story. Her words come out in a rush, fueled by long-suppressed frustration and the desire for justice. She recounts how she had noticed discrepancies in the NGO's financial records during her time there. Sarah describes her attempts to bring these issues to light, only to be met with hostility and eventually terminated from her position. Her voice trembles with emotion as she reveals the personal cost of her integrity, lost income, damaged reputation, and the emotional toll of being silenced. As Sarah speaks, the audience's attention shifts between her and the incriminating messages still displayed on the screen behind Charles. The correlation between her story and the exposed evidence becomes increasingly clear to everyone in the room. Donors who moments ago were ready to write generous checks now listen with growing concern and anger. Some nod in understanding, empathizing with Sarah's plight. Others begin to mutter among themselves, questioning their support of the organization. Charles, visibly flustered, tries to interject, but his protests are drowned out by the rising murmur of the crowd. He looks around frantically, realizing he's losing control of the situation. The atmosphere in the room transforms rapidly. What was once a gathering of enthusiastic supporters now feels more like a tribunal. Donors begin to stand up, some calling out questions, others demanding explanations. The air is thick with tension and the sense that something significant is unfolding. Sarah, emboldened by the response to her words, continues to speak. She urges the donors to reconsider their support and calls for a thorough investigation into the NGO's practices. Her voice, once silenced, now resonates throughout the temple, sparking a movement that threatens to unravel everything Charles has built. Charles's composure begins to crumble as the situation spirals out of his control. His eyes dart frantically between Sarah, the incriminating messages on the screen, and the increasingly agitated crowd. Beads of sweat form on his forehead, and his once confident stance becomes noticeably rigid. Attempting to salvage the situation, Charles raises his hands in a placating gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he begins, his voice strained. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to explain but his words are drowned out by the growing clamor of the audience. Realizing that his usual charm and persuasive tactics are failing him, panic sets in. Charles takes a step back from the podium, his eyes searching for an escape route. The grand stage that was meant to be the setting for his triumph has become a trap, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. As he edges towards the side of the stage, Charles notices a shift in the demeanor of his security team. The men who were once unquestioningly loyal now exchange uncertain glances. One of them presses a finger to his earpiece, listening intently before nodding to his colleagues. Charles's heart sinks as he realizes the implications. The security team, having received new orders, begins to move towards him with purpose. Their expressions are no longer deferential but determined, acting on behalf of a higher authority. The crowd, sensing the change in dynamics, becomes even more animated. Shouts for justice and demands for explanations fill the air. Some donors, emboldened by the unfolding events, begin to approach the stage, their faces contorted with anger and betrayal. In a last-ditch effort, Charles turns to flee backstage, but finds his path blocked by more security personnel. The realization hits him: there's nowhere to run. The very infrastructure he put in place to protect himself has now turned against him. As the security team closes in, the chaos in the temple reaches a fever pitch. Donors are on their feet, some calling for immediate action, others demanding refunds. The once orderly event has devolved into a scene of confusion and outrage. Charles, now cornered, looks out at the sea of faces he once charmed and manipulated. The gravity of his situation becomes painfully clear. His carefully constructed world of lies and deceit is collapsing around him. For the first time, he feels the weight of true consequences bearing down. The temple, once a symbol of his supposed benevolence, now seems to close in on him. The ancient walls that have witnessed centuries of justice being served stand silent, as if waiting to see how this modern drama of corruption and retribution will unfold. As the chaos in the temple intensifies, a remarkable phenomenon begins to unfold among the donors. What started as individual expressions of outrage and betrayal quickly evolves into a collective force. Small groups form throughout the crowd, with people sharing their personal experiences of being deceived by Charles and his NGO. One elderly woman, her voice quavering with emotion, recounted how she donated her life savings, believing it would fund a medical clinic in her late husband's name. A young entrepreneur reveals how he was persuaded to become a major sponsor, only to discover that none of his contributions reached the promised educational programs. These personal stories spread rapidly through the gathering, each tale adding fuel to the growing fire of indignation. The shared experiences create a bond among the donors, transforming them from a disparate group of individuals into a united front against corruption. As more people speak up, patterns emerge in Charles's deception. Donors begin to piece together the extent of his fraudulent activities, realizing that what they initially thought were isolated incidents are part of a larger, more sinister scheme. This newfound unity gives the group strength. They begin to organize, appointing impromptu leaders and discussing strategies to hold Charles and his organization accountable. Some start documenting the events on their phones, while others reach out to contacts in the media and law enforcement. Meanwhile, Charles, trapped and desperate, frantically searches for an escape route. He tugs at doors, only to find them inexplicably locked. The ancient temple, with its maze-like structure, seems to have turned against him, blocking every potential exit. As he moves from one sealed door to another, Charles can't shake the eerie feeling that the temple itself is conspiring to keep him contained. The weight of centuries of cosmic justice bears down on him, as if the very stones of the building are determined to see justice served. The donors, now a formidable collective, begin to close in on Charles. Their approach is not chaotic or violent, but deliberate and purposeful. They move as one, their faces set with determination to uncover the truth and seek retribution for the trust they've lost. Charles, his back literally against the wall, watches as the crowd advances. The realization dawns on him that this is more than just an angry mob. It's a force of justice, born from his own deceit, now poised to bring about his downfall. In this moment, trapped between the unyielding walls of the ancient temple and the approaching tide of those he's wronged, Charles finally grasps the full magnitude of his actions and the inevitability of their consequences. The sound of sirens pierces through the commotion inside the temple, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. Police officers enter the building, their presence adding a new layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. As the officers make their way through the crowd, the donors quickly reorganize themselves. There's a palpable shift in the air as they transition from an angry mob to a group of determined witnesses, each eager to share their story and provide evidence of Charles's wrongdoings. Sarah, who had been the catalyst for this revelation, steps forward. Her initial nervousness has been replaced by a steely resolve. She approaches the lead officer, introducing herself and offering to provide a comprehensive account of the fraudulent activities she witnessed during her time at the NGO. Other donors follow Sarah's lead, forming an orderly line to give their statements. Some pull out documentation they've kept, others offer access to email exchanges with Charles and his team. The collective effort to expose the truth is both impressive and damning. Meanwhile, Charles, cornered and with no more options for escape, watches as his world crumbles around him. The confidence and charm that once defined him have evaporated, leaving behind a shell of a man, his face a mask of defeat and dawning realization. As the police make their way towards Charles, Sarah's voice rises above the crowd once more. She calls for a thorough investigation into not just Charles's actions, but the entire structure of the NGO. Her words resonate with the gathered donors, who voice their support with determined nods and murmurs of agreement. The officers reach Charles, and in a moment that seems to unfold in slow motion, they begin to read him his rights. The click of handcuffs echoes through the temple, a sound that symbolizes the end of Charles's reign of deception. As Charles is led away, he casts one last look at the crowd. The sea of faces that once looked up to him with admiration now regard him with a mixture of disgust, disappointment, and resolve. It's a visual representation of how far he has fallen and the magnitude of trust he has broken. The donors, united in their determination to see justice served, begin to discuss next steps. They exchange contact information, promising to stay in touch and support each other through the legal proceedings that are sure to follow. As the night draws to a close, there's a sense of both closure and new beginnings. The fundraising event that started with such promise has transformed into something entirely different, the starting point of a movement dedicated to transparency and accountability in charitable organizations. As the police escort Charles out of the temple, he makes one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. "This is all a misunderstanding," he calls out, his voice strained and lacking its usual confidence. "I can explain everything." But his words fall on deaf ears. The donors, once hanging on his every word, now turn away in disgust. The scene outside the temple is chaotic. News vans have already arrived, their bright lights illuminating the night. Reporters clamor for statements, their microphones thrust towards anyone leaving the building. The story of Charles's downfall is spreading rapidly, becoming breaking news across local and national media outlets. Inside, the atmosphere has shifted from anger to a mix of determination and cautious optimism. The donors, still processing the events of the evening, begin to rally around Sarah. Her courage in speaking out has made her a natural leader in this unexpected movement. Sarah, feeling the weight of responsibility, addresses the group. "What happened here tonight is just the beginning," she says, her voice clear and resolute. "We can't let this end with Charles. We need to ensure that the people who were meant to benefit from our donations actually receive help." Her words resonate with the crowd. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the gathering. One by one, donors step forward, offering their skills and resources to help rebuild the NGO on a foundation of transparency and integrity. A tech entrepreneur offers to create a blockchain-based system for tracking donations. A retired auditor volunteers to oversee the financial restructuring. Others pledge to use their networks to spread awareness and attract ethical partners. As the impromptu planning session continues, Sarah finds herself at the center of it all. The very qualities that made her a threat to Charles's corrupt system, her integrity, attention to detail, and unwavering commitment to the truth, now make her the ideal person to lead the organization's resurrection. Outside, Charles is placed in a police car. As the door closes, he watches the temple, once the stage for his greatest triumph, now the scene of his ultimate downfall. The gravity of his situation finally sinks in. His life of luxury and false prestige is over, replaced by the prospect of legal battles and public scrutiny. Back inside, the donors are making plans for the immediate future. They agree to meet again soon to formalize their commitments and begin the process of rebuilding. There's a sense of purpose in the air, a collective determination to turn this scandal into an opportunity for real change. As the night draws to a close, Sarah stands at the temple entrance, watching the last of the donors leave. She feels a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The path ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she feels hopeful about the future of the organization and its potential to make a real difference. The following day, the story of Charles's downfall and the dramatic events at the temple dominate the news cycle. Television broadcasts, online news sites, and social media platforms are abuzz with updates, analyses, and public reactions. News anchors recount the shocking turn of events, their voices filled with a mix of disbelief and excitement as they describe how a high-profile charity fundraiser transformed into a scene of exposed corruption. Clips from amateur videos taken by attendees play on repeat, capturing the moment Sarah stood up to confront Charles and the subsequent chaos that ensued. Amidst this media frenzy, Sarah finds herself thrust into the spotlight. Camera crews gather outside her modest apartment, eager for an interview with a whistleblower who brought down a corrupt CEO. Initially overwhelmed by the attention, Sarah quickly realizes the opportunity it presents to share her vision for the NGO's future. In a press conference hastily arranged in a local community center, Sarah addresses the media. Flanked by several of the donors who had rallied around her the previous night, she speaks with conviction about the need for transparency in charitable organizations and her plans to rebuild the NGO from the ground up. "What happened yesterday was a tragedy," Sarah begins, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But it's also an opportunity to create real change, to build an organization that truly serves those in need, with full accountability to its donors and beneficiaries." As Sarah outlines her vision, the cameras capture the nodding heads and supportive gestures of the donors standing behind her. Their presence lends credibility to her words, showing a united front in the face of adversity. Throughout the day, more supporters come forward. Former employees of the NGO, emboldened by Sarah's example, reach out to offer their accounts of Charles's misdeeds. Simultaneously, messages of support flood in from other charitable organizations and public figures, praising Sarah's courage and offering assistance in the rebuilding efforts. The story takes another turn when several major donors who weren't present at the event released statements pledging their continued support to the NGO under Sarah's leadership. Their endorsements, coming from respected members of the business and philanthropic communities, provide a much-needed boost of confidence. As evening approaches, Sarah finds a quiet moment to reflect on the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. She's exhausted but energized, aware that this is just the beginning of a long and challenging journey. The weight of expectation sits heavily on her shoulders, but so does the knowledge that she has the support of a committed group of individuals who share her vision for change. The final news reports of the day paint a picture of contrast. Charles, once the charismatic face of charity, now faces legal consequences and public scorn, while Sarah emerges as a beacon of hope and integrity in the world of nonprofit organizations. As the days pass, Charles finds himself in a stark new reality. The opulent office and luxurious lifestyle he once enjoyed have been replaced by the confines of a jail cell as he awaits trial. The silence of his surroundings is a far cry from the constant bustle and adoration he was accustomed to. In this isolation, Charles has ample time to reflect on the choices that led him to this point. He recalls the early days of the NGO, when his intentions were genuinely altruistic. He ponders the moment when things began to change, when the allure of power and wealth started to corrupt his mission. Outside, the media's scrutiny intensifies. Investigative journalists dig deeper into Charles's past, uncovering a trail of financial discrepancies and questionable decisions that span years. Each new revelation adds another layer to the public's understanding of the scope of his deception. Charles receives visits from his lawyer, who paints a grim picture of the case against him. The evidence is overwhelming, with financial records, witness testimonies, and Charles's own incriminating messages forming a seemingly insurmountable case for the prosecution. As news of Charles's impending trial spreads, former allies begin to distance themselves. Business partners who once sought his company now release statements condemning his actions. Even old friends, wary of being associated with the scandal, decline to offer support or character references. The pressure mounts as more individuals come forward with stories of how Charles's actions affected them personally. Beneficiaries who were promised aid that never materialized share their experiences, adding faces and names to the abstract notion of those in need that Charles had exploited for so long. Meanwhile, the fallout from Charles's actions ripples through the nonprofit sector. Regulatory bodies announce plans for stricter oversight of charitable organizations. Other NGOs scramble to demonstrate their transparency and accountability, fearful of being tarred with the same brush. Public indignation grows with each passing day. Social media campaigns call for justice, with hashtags demanding accountability in the charity sector trending globally. The story becomes a catalyst for broader discussions about trust, ethics, and the responsibility of those in positions of power. In his cell, Charles watches these developments on a small television, the weight of his actions becoming increasingly apparent. The man who once commanded rooms with his charisma now struggles to face his own reflection, confronted with the reality of the lives he's impacted and the trust he's betrayed. As the date of his trial approaches, Charles realizes that regardless of the legal outcome, his reputation and the life he knew are irreparably damaged. The legacy he hoped to build has crumbled, replaced by a cautionary tale of greed and deception in the world of philanthropy. The once celebrated CEO now faces not just the prospect of legal punishment, but also the harsh judgment of a public he deceived and the personal reckoning with the man he has become. The day of Charles's trial arrives, bringing with it a media frenzy. The courthouse is surrounded by reporters, activists, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the culmination of this high-profile case. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is tense. As Charles is led in, he appears a shadow of his former self. His designer suits have been replaced by standard-issue attire, his once confident stride now hesitant and uncertain. The prosecution presents a damning case against Charles. Financial records reveal years of systematic embezzlement. Emails and text messages expose his deliberate deception of donors and beneficiaries alike. Former employees testify to a culture of corruption that permeated the organization under his leadership. Sarah takes the stand as a key witness. Her testimony is clear, concise, and devastating. She recounts her experiences within the NGO, detailing the moment she first suspected wrongdoing and her subsequent efforts to bring the truth to light. Her words carry weight, not just because of their content, but because of the quiet strength and integrity she exudes. As Sarah speaks, she encourages others who have been silenced to come forward. Her testimony becomes a rallying cry for transparency and accountability in the nonprofit sector. The courtroom, filled with donors, former employees, and media, hangs on her every word. Charles's defense team attempts to paint him as a misguided idealist who lost his way, but their arguments feel hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. As the trial progresses, It becomes increasingly clear that Charles's actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a long-standing pattern of fraud and deception. In a desperate move, Charles takes the stand in his own defense. However, under cross-examination, his carefully constructed facade crumbles. He stumbles over contradictions in his story, and his attempts to justify his actions only serve to further incriminate him. After days of testimony and arguments, the jury reaches a verdict quickly. Charles is found guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the extensive nature of the fraud and the betrayal of public trust, hands down a severe sentence. As Charles is led away, the focus shifts to Sarah. In the aftermath of the trial, she is hailed as a hero. Her courage in standing up against corruption inspires others in the nonprofit world to examine their own organizations and practices. Sarah uses this platform to launch initiatives promoting transparency in charitable organizations. She works tirelessly to rebuild the NGO, implementing strict oversight measures and creating pathways for whistleblowers to safely report concerns. The story concludes with Sarah receiving recognition for her efforts. At an awards ceremony celebrating ethical leadership, she delivers a powerful speech about the importance of integrity in public service. As she looks out at the audience, she sees faces filled with hope and determination, a stark contrast to the disillusionment that marked the beginning of this journey. The final scene shows Charles in his cell, watching Sarah's speech on a small TV. As he listens to her words about accountability and second chances, a mix of emotions crosses his face: regret, admiration, and perhaps a glimmer of hope for redemption. The story ends with the sense that while one chapter of corruption has closed, a new era of transparency and ethical leadership in the nonprofit world has just begun, with Sarah at its forefront.